Good morning and welcome to episode 73 of the Just Life podcast. This is David Schmeichel, one of your co-hosts. And today we have a guest. We talk about the experience of being new to Canada and finding your place in a new area, the journey and the struggle and the challenge of fitting in. We get to explore this rich experience of father and son, the relationship between us and what we can take away in that learning and what we can pass on to the next generation. The impact of losing someone you love and what it takes when opportunity and preparation come together. Enjoy the episode. So we are here again on a lovely, cloudy, rainy Saturday morning, which is perfect, really, to be locked up in the basement recording a podcast. I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything. And we have a guest this morning, Craig Tervit.
Tervit, yeah.
Nice,
well done.
Nice. And I actually can't read my writing, so thank God I fucking made that. So we got Craig Tervit on as a guest. Welcome, Craig. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
This is the second time we attempted to get you on, and shit happens, and I'm glad that you made it, and I'm excited about our conversation. I want to set this up first off. You're one of the few that after giving the exercise to give us a little bit about you, wrote a novel.
Well, not only that, I would assert, based on what we shared, about you're also one of the few that actually went to
filled it out.
Everybody gives you back the very robotic,
the stuff they want to hear,
boxy, response, very surface level.
Yeah,
and you actually got real inside of your.
Well, I mean, I think that partly stems from listening to you guys. So I know,
the expectations have been set.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's awesome.
The funny thing is, I was thinking about it on the way here, and the counterpoint to that is I just said a bunch of stuff that was in response, exactly what I was thinking to the question, what are things that you struggle with, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And then I was coming here today, I was like, I don't know that necessarily is the stuff that defines me per se. It's just what popped into my head at that moment.
100%.
You know how it's funny how you can kind of express that kind of thing at a moment, and then later on be like, well, that's not exactly my story per se,
right.
Even though it's a part of it, right? So it was just funny thinking about how I was like, maybe this isn't. I don't know. We can roll with it.
Maybe I didn't get it right.
Exactly. Is this representative of me?
I get what you're saying, man. It's the same thing when I'll share something on social, and then you got to deal with the aftermath of people's interpretation of what it is that you shared.
Without context.
Yeah, without context, they just go, they take
I know who you are.
Yeah, into the moment.
I got you.
I'm sharing from this moment right now, and right now I feel like a complete piece of shit. If that's the post, then people are like, oh my God, Vern's he's going to commit suicide.
He probably needs some help.
Yeah, oh my gosh, right? So I get what you're saying. You're thinking about something in the moment, it's present for you, and then it becomes absolute all of a sudden.
Well, and here's the other thing. We typically are not given the time, either from others or for ourselves, to be able to contemplate, go introspective, and answer some of these questions in a meaningful way. We do it to get it done. And move on to the next thing, right? And so there are some where Michael, for example, his was, in terms of successes, was filling out the form. He wrote this, was filling out the form to this point. That was his answer.
It was question 2 was
he's not closing my browser while reading this question. I'm like, wow. And I know he's tongue in cheek. He's a guy who likes to kind of poke buttons and stuff.
Yeah.
But that is kind of how it goes. We are just gonna.
Well, it's really easy at any moment to be either to give the bare minimum or to just give a glib answer that's funny, but you don't actually have to do that.
Well, there's no responsibility there.
Yeah,
not to say, Michael, that you're not being responsible. You're not being responsible. And we loved you on the podcast.
Yeah, you were awesome.
So that said, there was some great stuff that you shared, and I really I got you as a person in this world. How old are your kids?
10, 4, and 1.5.
Jesus.
Yeah.
It's like your life's never going to end, dude.
All girls too. It's,
nice.
It's me and a bunch of estrogen.
That would
Perfect.
be
No wonder you're getting in
interesting.
shape. I get it. Yeah.
Totally, yeah.
I get it.
You got to beat them off with
Yeah.
sticks, big, heavy ones.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and in that journey, so there's a couple things that I'm going to pull out
For sure.
of what you shared,
Yeah.
and that's the whole reason for this is like, oh, yeah, that's what I'm wanting to talk about. Not necessarily wanting to get to know you per se, but let's have something to talk about so that we can get to know each other.
Yeah, for sure.
Speaking of which, you being a lawyer, we should probably have some like documents, some disclaimers, something about the content.
I have an agreement to play that we do with our clients, and it's like you get to have fun, you get to contribute, and you get to get out of your own way, and we could do one of those. But I think that's implied by the fact that we're here. So,
fair.
Well,
can we do it verbally?
Absolutely. And he's already listened to the podcast, so he knows exactly what he's getting himself into.
Yeah, totally.
Out of curiosity, do you guys do a release?
No.
Like, it's just like... what?
Now I feel like we should
Do
I mean,
what?
a release.
At some point, you just put something
Yeah,
simple together
I
that
was
just says,
ha-
like, your guests don't have rights over the...
Yeah,
I was half joking,
makes
but also kind of serious when I said that.
totally. Well, all right, noted.
Well, you know what, though? What's great about this is, again, gritty, real, and uncensored, live and in the moment. I mean, this is episode 73 of the Just Life podcast.
Yeah.
So we're, like, learning as we go here.
Yeah, no, for
And
sure.
we're developing. And you came on a great day because it really looks like we got our shit together here.
It does.
And it's a great...
I was not expecting 3 cameras.
This
Yeah.
feels like press.
yeah, like a
level.
podium.
Look
like,
how dope
yeah.
that is. He has one position so that it actually records Keith as well. So
Keith's like, what?
You better look good the whole time, man. No picking your nose over there.
Too late.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Anyway,
awesome.
so sorry.
We
Tangent alert.
we love our tangents. So there's a couple things that I want to talk about.
Yeah.
You touched on a little bit about your journey as a man, your relationship with your father, this trickle down effect that now comes with your, whether you are present to it or not, this relationship to male authority, and this is this is so important a conversation to have about, and it's everywhere and not enough of it because there's still so many people that aren't hearing it.
Well, it's so surface level.
It is still surface level by nature of the fundamental problem at its core, and that is that us men have our shit together, right? Like there's nothing wrong here.
Yeah.
We're not allowed to not have our shit together.
For sure. Yeah.
So you touched on about your relationship with your dad. Dare I say, we are all men here who have likely experienced the exact same thing. And I'd love to pull that apart a little bit. Share with me a little bit about your childhood and where you've come from, because you're not Canadian.
Well, I am now.
I mean, you are now. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
But that's not. And are we all? Any of us really
he's
Canadian?
like, you son of a bitch.
Amen. There's no censorship here. But yeah, you've come from somewhere else.
Yeah. So I was born in South Africa, and it was a big change moving to Canada from South Africa.
How old were you?
I was 11. So
wow, okay.
You might notice I don't have an accent. At all.
Yeah, it's a bit disappointing actually.
I know. Trust me.
Didn't catch that.
Siri, shut up.
He said he doesn't have an accent. I would totally
Trust me. When I
lean
first
into
got
that.
here, at that age, I was pretty insecure about things, and I was just like, I want to fit in. So honestly, it was something that I actually tried to do was
For sure,
match my accent with everyone else, and I'm actually to this day pretty good at like accents, even if I'm like learning French or Spanish. The first thing the teacher says is like, a lot of potential. You got the accent down pretty well, because I just have the ear for it. The rest of it maybe not so much, but the
I can't
accent part
speak
I
for
can
shit,
do.
but-
Yeah, exactly. After the fact, when I was in my early 20s and trying to pick up girls, and at that point I really wished I still had the accent.
Just lean into that
But
thing.
no.
But you must be
it
able
was
to
gone
like
by
just
that.
pull it out and
Not well. Like, it's a bit like, I don't know, asking you to do probably like a Boston accent. You're like, I can do it, but it's not going to be good.
unless I practice it,
Yeah.
it will sound like I'm trying to do a Boston accent.
Poorly, probably. yeah.
Poorly, yes. definitely.
If if I'm around other South Africans who have a strong accent for a while, I can do it more. But
that makes sense.
Yeah.
So you came out of South Africa as a young boy.
I mean, sorry to interrupt, but like,
Feel free.
it's a crazy place to have grown up, especially when I did grow
I
up
have
there.
friends.
Shit,
I
yeah.
know. I have a sense of South Africa as a place, and it's like crazy out there.
I mean, we left shortly after the end of apartheid, and so I grew up in it.
What's apartheid?
Apartheid is, black people weren't allowed to vote. But, there was completely separate, societies and for a lot of things. Like, even, you've heard of Soweto outside of Johannesburg, this big, kind of like a slum, something along those lines. What that actually started as was that black people weren't allowed to live in the main city of Johannesburg, but everyone needed nannies and gardeners and all those kinds of things. So they were this was where they could live. It was outside of Johannesburg, and they could live separately and then come in and do all the work for everyone there and then leave again. Like, it's a crazy system.
It's amazing.
Dark part about that, too. One, it's all dark. But that's actually apartheid's what the Canadian system was based on, which is terrifying as well. The reserves and all that kind of stuff. So...
Yeah, they're trying to. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no.
Good job.
Everybody likes to
150th.
pretend, man.
Like, it's totally.
Here.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
it's adorable.
Totally different thing. Which
especially when you hear Americans,
adorable, like ugly little dog. Adorable.
Yeah, like it's no, really though. That's why I was joking earlier when I said like, hey, I'd do like you talk about me behind my back. Well, that's very Canadian of you because we're like so passive aggressive here. We've got the world convinced that we're like these lovely, wonderful, nice people who hold doors and say please and thank you and actually talk to each other, which is all true.
To a
And
measure.
there's there's kind of like an in my opinion, there's like an ugly monster behind that looks like that fucker stepped on my toe. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
So that's why we have hockey. We beat people up on ice. It's weird.
Yeah. Well,
That's where we take out our
Well,
aggression.
actually, I mean, that's probably a fairly healthy way to go about it. Is to like have some outlet and then go back to being nice. Like,
yeah. Anyway, that was a tangent too. But
Well, and to that point, we're actually we're really drained in those outlets. There isn't enough of them anymore.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
And now we are even more pent up. And now it doesn't look like passive aggression. It is driving a van through crowded streets in a city.
Yeah,
for sure.
Which
it's snapping.
it's starting to break. So a pretty. I'm sure you got plenty of stories to really paint the picture of living where you lived. You moved here. You started fresh. Where did you land in Canada?
My parents actually did something very neat when we got here, actually, which was because Canada is, I don't know if you're aware, it's a very big place.
What? It's
a lot of people from
it's like to Airdrie, no?
outside of Canada are very unfamiliar with that. But what my parents did was we actually flew to Toronto, and we were eventually going to live in Vancouver, and we took the train. And
that's amazing.
Got a chance to actually see how big the country is,
Yeah.
but also we stopped in like Edmonton and Winnipeg, all the tourist hotspots,
Totally.
stayed in this place
Yeehaw.
for a few days, and each time, so it wasn't like a 7-day train trip or anything like that. But at the same time, got a bit of a sense of some cities in Canada, what the whole country's like, how insanely big it is, that kind of thing, which was pretty cool.
And do you remember what time of year you came?
I think it was summertime because it was one of the stops was in Jasper, and we climbed up I think there was a gondola or something up to the top of one of these mountains, and it was the first time we saw snow, but it wasn't really snow, it was like the icy slush stuff that's left over.
It's dirty.
And we were still just like, this is the best ever! Oh my god!
Rolling around in
Yeah.
it? That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so cool.
That is, most Canadians don't get to really appreciate how diverse and rich and and expansive this country is.
Yeah, we don't go to Miami and go, oh my God, sand! Like,
Yeah.
it's not the same.
No,
right?
no.
But I mean,
a little
also,
bit of
most
everything
Canadians
here.
don't even experience most of Canada. Like,
No,
to be honest,
that's true.
I figured I'd go all over Canada as well, and I still haven't gone to the East Coast anywhere. I totally intend to, but I've done a lot of travels elsewhere, and I just,
Well, it really is like, I was talking about this yesterday, like my dad lives in New Brunswick, and literally I can take my whole family to Mexico for an all-inclusive for cheaper than I can get them to New Brunswick to visit my dad.
Yeah.
And we're within the same country. It's madness.
Almost by design, dare I say. Anyways, that's a
Strange.
whole
We don't want to go down that rabbit hole, eh?
Okay, so let's talk about your relationship with your father.
Yes. Okay. Wow.
Wow. We said all that to
Psychologist
get
couch.
here.
Yeah, well, I guess.
What did he say? I missed
The
that.
psychologist couch.
Yeah, totally.
Let's talk
Tell me
about
about
your
your dad.
relationship
Yeah.
with your father.
Everything's going to circle back to that. Well, yeah, so I mean, from what I've heard, when my dad was younger, he was pretty easygoing and whatever, but I think he had difficulty expressing, setting boundaries on things, and so as a result, he never got to the point where he had healthy boundaries with people at work, even with family, anything like that, and then it would come out as like anger and things like that, right? And that's obviously, we've all flown off the handle at times, and then after the fact, you're like, oh my god, I can't believe I just did that.
Totally.
You're getting
Right?
that
What you
animal
do
brain.
after, I mean, that is the difference maker.
Yeah, well, I mean, although if you've been around someone who's, and like, there's people who have much worse stories or anything like that, so this isn't like a sob story, but like, when you find that you've just gotten really angry at someone and yelled or whatever it is, and after the fact you're thinking about it and you apologize, in the back of my head, sometimes I'll be like, is this just that cycle of when someone's like an asshole and then they're like, oh, I'm sorry, and then like,
Completely
we're gonna do the same
justified to
thing
do it
again,
again.
you know what I mean?
Most likely.
Yeah, I mean, we will all get pissed off and whatever. Again, is like if you're learning from it, I guess, right?
Yeah, you don't punch somebody, say I'm sorry, and then punch them again.
Yeah,
that definitely negates the apology.
That would be really twisted, wouldn't it? I'm sorry. And you just, that's that's
dude.
the image I got
That's
in my
the
head.
The visual
Yeah.
is
Wow.
is
Anyway,
provocative.
but no, and so that was a big part of the difficulty growing up with my dad. Like he would be happy-go-lucky and happy with whatever, and then just like angry, yelling, all that kind of stuff. Like he struggled a lot when we moved to Canada as well, because he went from a society where the man's in charge, that kind of thing. Like my mom is incredibly intelligent. They were in Rhodesia before they moved to South Africa, and even there, like generally the only thing that anyone did was if you were a female and you went to university, you could become a teacher or like a librarian, something along those lines, right? Or a nurse or something like that. Those were your options. And she got a full degree in math. She from London, which was actually London University had a campus there. And so she was very, very intelligent. A lot of her skills translated. She was a computer programmer in South Africa and things like that. So my dad, though, had a no, he didn't have a degree at all. He did instrumentation work for the Air Force in Rhodesia, and then in South Africa, he did a lot of work on, things like hospital equipment and things like that. But then came to Canada, all the stuff he'd been working on was insanely out of date in Canada, and there was just nothing really for him to do, right? And so he came from a background where it was really hard to transition to the point of being like, I'll just be like a stay-at-home dad or something like that. Like, that's not an option, right?
Right.
And,
His
a lot of
identity was
frustration.
really wrapped inside of what he did or had done and what he's now not doing.
Yeah. And also, funny thing, my dad always had this sort of idea of, more so for the US than Canada, but the idea that this was sort of, he just had to get over here and everything would be great. The American dream, that kind of thing. Definitely less the Canadian dream. Yeah, exactly. And then it really wasn't, right? It was in a lot of ways
and
for
dirty.
us.
Yeah,
I mean,
shit, eh?
there's stuff that he loved about it for sure, but I think, the fact that he couldn't be a success here when it was like the promised land of all that kind of stuff, that really ate at him, right? For sure.
Wow.
And I would imagine that that really influenced how he showed up. His temper potentially a little bit shorter.
Yeah. I'm making it sound like he was this horrifically violent person, but that wasn't the case.
No,
but
I
at the
don't
same
think so.
time, there's levels of like emotional violence and things like that where someone can be,
You say that little thing that digs deeper than a knife, and
sure,
you don't
yeah.
even realize it because your rational mind's not in control in the moment, but you don't know it, and so
it's tough.
it is what it is,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and when I was a teenager, it was really like, I frequently was just like, I'm gonna punch your face in right now,
yeah,
because when you're a teenager boy and you're like dealing with someone who can't, try to relate to you on your level rather than it's my way or the highway, like no matter what, which I'm sure we can all relate to. Like parents
Hands
are like
down.
that anyways, but like combined with irrationality and like anger, it's just like, I'm gonna fucking tune you up right now, that kind of thing, right?
For sure.
It doesn't, never got to that or anything like that, but I certainly wanted
Yeah.
Well, it reminds me of the relationship that I had with my dad. So grew up, you may or may not know, in a pretty structured environment, highly religious, lots of expectations, and the underlying rule, the understated, never really said, but like expected, was you do as I say.
Yeah.
So there was always this succeed, whatever I feel, whatever choice is for me is actually not my choice unless I get permission to do that thing.
Right.
And so that's now pulled, and I noticed it, have noticed it along my journey of running my own businesses and being with quote unquote successful people, and now succeeding all control over to them because they know better. And no longer having any voice, feeling like I have any control, and I'm at their whim of direction, and not because they're the ones who suggested it, but because I gave it to them.
Yeah.
There's this subconscious, as little boys, well, our dad knows best, right? And if that's not met with a level of compassionate, empathetic conversation, like you get to create with this little boy something, we're going to do that at 30 years old, at 40 years old, with the others who are older, but really should not be in the chair that's steering the boat.
For sure.
They actually should be the ones taking some lessons. And I think that's the beauty of where we're at now is I get to learn from my boy. And there are times where I learn from my dad, and I'm reminded of what not to do. Flare up, temper, fuck, shouldn't have done that. Got to clean that up. But not clean it up as like, I'm sorry, I'm going to punch you again later. I'm sorry, and here's why I'm sorry, and here's how I'm going to improve it. And now he's got something that he's actually taken away as like a thing to do.
Yeah, it can actually be a net positive as opposed to...
Yeah, totally, because we're going to fuck up.
Yeah, we're all people. Like, you can't... This idea of, like, the, perfect parenting or whatever, it doesn't exist, right? Like,
To that point, something that can be detrimental to your kids is constantly, giving them an answer even though you don't know the answer.
The feeling that you should give an answer. Totally.
Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but like I think in their era, part of that too was like, especially particularly with men, but back 20, 30 years ago, I'm not pointing out any generation here particularly, but let's just say, for example, they called them the boomers. You ask a question, it goes back to that whole insecurity thing, right? You ask your dad a question and they just give you some bogus fucking answer, right? And then you grow up thinking that they constantly know the answer, and then one day you discover like, oh, they don't really know shit. What does that mean about me? At least that was kind of partially my experience growing up, right? I realized like, oh, they actually don't have their shit together at all.
I found that the other side to that is you either you end up thinking in sort of a dichotomy of how things can work. So it's either on one side, I'm just going to listen to whatever you say and just believe it outright, or I have to throw it all out and not believe it at all and just make up my own mind. Whereas really what it should be is, let's have a conversation about it. You know some stuff, and let's sort of work it together. But if you're either in I'm just going to follow you blindly, or I have to figure it out all on myself, that's a tough thing to try and deal with.
100%.
Yeah. Have you had those types of conversations with your dad yet?
My dad has passed away.
Oh,
so,
okay.
I mean, that's...
We probably should have put that in the bio questions.
No.
Foot in mouth. No,
don't. You know what? My dad passed away in, 4 or 5 years ago. And, I mean, it's tough. Like, we never actually had, like, let's sort this all out and we're on the same page. I tried a few times, but it was kind of, he wasn't at that point. Yeah, you know what I mean?
It's
like,
hard.
You can go to someone, but they have to come to you as well for you to sort of fix things or have any kind of thing. So it kind of ended up, that's where I was, you know?
I go 90, you go 10, right?
Yeah, totally.
Well, everyone thinks they go 90, right?
Yeah, totally. Well, my 90 is actually your 60.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, well, and this is perfect because you actually then go into to talk about how this transitioned into you being a business owner and a father, and this inherent involuntary guilt that tends to show up, questioning yourself around whether you're doing the right things.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, and that's tough, and I think most people would deal with it. I don't think I'm isolated in that. I think...
no, I got my shit figured out.
Yeah.
You got the podcast. You know,
man.
Now you're set.
I'm ready.
You're on episode 73, you said? Or
Yeah,
you should have it figured out by
I
now.
got all of this figured out. I haven't done anything with it, but I got to figure it out.
No, and so, I mean, as a parent, it's tough because I don't feel like I have that idea of what it's like to be the dad that I want to be. And so it's tricky to decide whether you're
What
being
is the idea of the dad that you want to be?
Well, I mean, that's a difficult one to unwrap because I think sometimes it's a reactionary thing where you're like, am I actually trying to be who I think is a great parent, or am I just being like, well, my dad did, I can do the opposite of that. You know what I mean?
Right, in spite
and
of.
so that's just as bad as following in someone else's footsteps, right?
Yeah, I think
directly.
I think when you have that conversation going on, though, you actually have like awareness such that you have a little bit more, you know.
Well, there's another
Control
prong
over those choices,
right? In the road, right? You can go in a different direction. It wasn't there before.
Yeah, you're being aware of it is all that.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's also similarly like with parenting in general. I feel like, you know, in the same day, you can be simultaneously thinking like, oh, I'm like not paying enough attention to my kids. And then later on be like, well, they're not doing their own thing enough, whatever. And it's like, you know, I think this was in my thing. We were talking about sort of like, it's kind of like a tightrope nowadays where you're like, the expectation is so insanely high. Whereas for our parents, it was like, did you kill the kid? No? Well done. You're a great parent.
100%. That is so... Yeah, the expectations. Like, my kids are all... I'm like, oh, so what do you guys want to do today? They're like, oh, can we go to Edmonton? Like, what? Like, can we go to West Edmonton Mall or something? You know, they'll pull out...
Things that you as a kid would never have thought of to even ask.
Yeah. And they're serious. Like, hey, can we, like, go to Edmonton for a couple days or something? Or, like, maybe they're like...
And then what shows up for you right there in that moment?
Oh, dude.
Because dare I say, I've experienced the exact same thing.
Yeah, no.
Specifically with West
What the
Edmonton Mall.
fuck? You think money grows on trees?
Yeah, we're constantly having... Well, I think there's a lot of difference there, too. Like, our parents probably would actually do that. What the fuck are you talking about? Do you think... You know how expensive that is? Money grow out trees, right? Whereas me, I wouldn't actually say that. I might be thinking that, but I'm going like, okay, well, I don't want to damage my kids. I don't want... You know what I mean? Like,
you don't want to prevent them from asking again.
That, and I don't want them to think that they don't get things or that we can't provide for them. Like, there's a million things that goes on. So depending on the circumstance of the situation, like, I might start feeling insecure. Then I got to, like, have a conversation with my wife or get coached or something so that I can go and have a conversation with my kids and not be reactionary. Because I've seen that myself where I've definitely, you know, we've had conversations. I've done damage. I've fucking flown off the handle in my house or with my kids, or they've seen me like smash things or whatever. Like, it's not like that hasn't happened, right?
Yeah.
And then, but the difference is, I think, is, you know, at least from my perspective, being willing and able to go and have a conversation with them that looks like, hey, by the way, like, that's not okay, and that's not a good representation of who dad is and who I want to be. And by the way, I'm a human being.
Mm-hmm. Do you actually think you've done damage, though? You said that, but I don't think you've done damage.
I don't think I've done damage.
If you figured out
not yet,
afterwards.
Yeah, particularly because the course correction, right?
Yeah.
Right? Because, you know, you can, you know, slam the chair on the deck, for example, and fucking the kids see you losing your shit in your underwear on the back deck.
That actually happened
on a Wednesday morning, and then you can go
Some
down.
say he might have turned green.
Then you can come in the house and slam the door, and then you can fucking tell everyone in the house that they're a piece of shit, and then you can go and crack a bottle of booze. Like, do you see what I'm saying? Like, obviously, because the whole time though, it's
Now it's a
because
tangent.
you're feeling worse and worse and worse about what a piece of shit you are, and so you're trying to either escape it, or where the power comes in is when you fucking deal with it.
Yeah.
Right, when you go and like have a conversation and get vulnerable
Yeah,
with your
where
kids or your
you
wife or
actually
whoever it
go
is.
spiraling down in the hopelessness of it.
Right.
It's double-sided too, because a part of it feels good.
You
know?
know? Didn't I say that to you? That's exactly what I said to you. I was like, man.
Minus
it
like the
feels so
punch
good.
and
No. Like it
hurting
doesn't.
your hand.
No, but you know, a part of you is like, oh yeah. And that's why it's hard to like.
Well, and
Sorry.
here's the interesting thing about that. And I've been doing a lot of research over the course of the last couple months. I'm working to put a men's retreat together called Superpower Camp. And it is, as I explore and look and see, it confirms my assumptions about what's missing for us men. And it's really interesting. Like when I talk about this stuff, right away, it is, oh, you better be careful, because you might attract the wrong the wrong opinions of what you're trying to do, i.e., you know, men are actually superior to women, and we do not agree with this feminist movement. Like everybody goes there almost right
totally,
away, right?
Yeah, it has nothing to do with that.
It has nothing to do with that.
Nothing
It actually
to do with
has
it.
everything to do with we have suppressed ourselves. Women are suppressing themselves in their own way. And I'm not a woman, so I can't talk to that. But what I can talk to is my experience as a man, my experience being around men, your experience as a man, and being in and at times our inability to be around men who are a bit more quote unquote alpha, and we just don't know what to do with it, or whatever the case may be.
For sure.
We lack this outlet to release what needs to be released, because we are wired that way. As people who are as humans who are driving with testosterone, it needs to be channeled somewhere. Women don't have that to the degree that we do, but we're expected to manage it like women do, right? Like as a super. If I were to collapse it all together, that's kind of how it goes. Like, oh yeah, but you can't do that because that's wrong. We need the outlet, and we do not have the outlets anymore. And so what happens? We fly off the handle.
Yeah.
And it feels good.
But
you shouldn't feel good about it, is the immediate thing that happens. And that is also not true.
Yeah. Well, and going back like just a little bit on what you were saying, like you were saying that this is almost seen as like a pro-men, anti-women thing. But, you know, nothing could be, I mean, from a guy's perspective, I feel like there's few things that you can do that actually helps support like the feminist movement than having a bunch of guys who are actually have that outlet, so that they're not assholes and they're not like,
and that they're aware of the balance between
exactly
knowing that they have the power to do something, to hurt somebody, and understanding what each of our boundaries and barriers are that need to be in place to manage that, so that we are creating a safe environment for our children and for our women. And I mean, it's that perspective. We're not going around knocking people's heads around.
Well, this is something we've been talking about for a while. Like I was going through my own, and at the end of 2018, you know, for about 6 months there, I was like I just couldn't deal with my shit. Like I was angry and I was dealing with a lot of different stuff. And a lot of times it would show up as like depression or weakness or that kind of thing. Because, you know, I'd even show up on the podcast and I was saying to David, like, dude, I need to fucking, this sounds really bad. Like, I need to kill something. I need to fucking, I need to be able to like, I got all
metaphorically.
This, yeah, metaphorically. But I've got this like insane amount of energy brewing up inside of me.
And it's got nowhere to go.
Yeah, and I've got this connection to like, I don't know what it was like, but like hundreds of years ago, like we would be doing this, having a powwow, and then we would go and like kill something. Or we would like be aggressive. We would go and, you know what I mean? And that's part of our makeup. So I felt like so contained.
Yes.
Right? And had all this stuff that was going on in my brain and whatnot, and just felt like I had no outlet. Do you know what I'm saying? So
well, and most men don't have that outlet.
Yeah, including a conversation, a space where they can get together as a man and be like, dude, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing.
Yeah, because it actually can't be just about killing things either.
That's
right. we know how that goes.
Yeah,
no, for sure.
It leaves a void Not that well, actually, that's not true. I have killed things. When my dad was a hunter growing up, and I experienced that, and I get the necessity of it.
I think what you're pointing to is it can't all just be extreme aggressive and then, okay, I'm back in the office. Yeah. No, there's got to be like a level of, like I said, a conversation, ways to express yourself other than just pretending like you got your shit together all the time.
And I think also to think of it in terms of like a range as opposed to like aggressive society.
That's what I'm saying.
It's two separate things.
It's incremental, actually, and there's such a nuance to it, and there's such a inside of the nuance of what we can do, the options for us that are available to us to be able to express ourselves, to be able to feel like we've successfully released that tension. It isn't just one or two things. We have so much available to us to be able to do that. It's just most of us don't realize that it's available.
Yeah.
And we do tend to, as human beings, go to the extremes. Like, I guess I just got to do this thing. Well, you need to spend more time thinking about what you could do.
Yeah.
Because there's more out there.
Yeah, and there's practices. Yeah, you're exactly right. Like, there's like this whole polar swing. You know what? I'm going to sell my business. I'm going to close the doors.
Totally.
I'm going to sell all my shit. I'm going to move to fucking small town New Brunswick, and that.
And then 6 months after that, you'd be like, I need to go do something.
I'm going crazy.
What am I doing?
Yeah. It's striking that balance.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Awesome.
Yeah. Back to what you were talking about with the sort of authority figures and things like that.
Yeah.
That is tough because I think it's built in that idea of either, back to that idea of either sort of following someone blindly. So like in terms of, especially jobs I've been in and things like that, I think that's why I'm an entrepreneur now, because it was either I have to follow what you're doing, an event like, to the letter, and that's incredibly frustrating. At least to me, or I have to like reject it outright and just do my own thing, which is what I'm doing now, which is fine. But I struggle with working with someone in that capacity, particularly when they're maybe like senior to me or have more experience.
Yep.
It's hard. I'm terrible at asking for advice. I guess in theory I should be saying I'm not yet good at asking for advice, but yeah, it's something that I do poorly with. Like I have a business coach, and he'll be like, I'm available to you anytime something comes up. Let me know. Like everyone else calls me all the time, and it doesn't even occur to me to even ask. Like
right.
It's like, this is a problem, I'm gonna solve it. It doesn't even
Yeah, I got that.
So I have a question around that. What kind of structure do you have in place to be able to reflect on where you were at in that moment, or to be able to like, do you spend the time to look at how the day went in order for you to contextualize where support might be warranted?
I don't think I have a good system for that at all. I think I just
That's so
deal with
weird.
it as it comes up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, some on occasion, but for the most part, it's very much like, okay, got that done, on to the next thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is probably why I'm still in the same situation.
Right.
In that regard.
Well, and that is so by nature of the work that we've been exploring for a while. When I don't do my check-in, and I don't get connected to how the day went and why I did what I did, or why that success was there, and what got up to that point to have that be there, or what that frustration or that conflict.
Yeah.
There is never any space for me to true it up.
Yeah.
And so there is actually, in your case, there is never the awareness of, this is a conversation that I should have with my coach.
Yeah, for
because to your point, it's one thing after the next. There's no time. It's all been filled up with all the other stuff. And when you look at your day at the end of the day, you're like, yeah, I guess it went all right. And, and then I will...
Or what a shitty day.
Or what a shitty day. And then I will check out. I got to relax. Those are air quotes, by the way.
Yeah.
I keep forgetting that this is an audio. And it's rinse and repeat potentially the next day.
Yeah,
Wondering why we're not... I feel like I'm not going anywhere. Or it's not very fulfilling, or whatever the case.
For sure. I think I'm much better at it. Like, I'm good at doing that at home with the kids and all that kind of stuff because I'm good at having conversations about stuff. But I think I have this mindset about work where I'm like, okay, we got this stuff done. There's another task. There's another thing. There's no, I'll socialize with my, employee and things like that. But at the same time, and with my clients, but it's not, I don't do a ton of like, let's really think about how that went and have a long, in-depth discussion about that because I'm just like, I'm too busy. I don't have time for that.
Right.
Which is an easy thing to do when,
It's an easy thing to say, and it has a big impact.
Yeah.
And you seem like the type of guy who isn't satisfied with the mediocrity that tends to be everywhere.
Yeah.
So that's something you get to look at.
Yeah. No, for sure. Yeah. It's funny that it's something that I wouldn't do at home, but when it's work, it's somehow a different scenario.
Totally. Well, then to your point of the dichotomy, the extremes that we go, this is a work thing. And no, this is a home thing.
Like as if one doesn't impact the other.
Right.
Yeah.
It's actually a living thing.
Yeah.
And the sooner we realize that it is all one thing, the more power we have around it, the more options are available to us, and the more we feel like we can actually do something about it.
Yeah.
It's not as siloed as we tend to create it. Fuck, we're good at making silos. So good.
Oh, it's so easy because it's like without trying anything, it's like you naturally silo, right?
Yeah.
It's just, I can turn that off and then just not have to worry about it. Cool, that's great. And then we'll just pick it up again in the morning and just go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, TGIF, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that whole the weekend thing. Just be like,
I'll just shut it off until Monday morning and not worry about it.
Yeah.
So I want to spend a little bit of time before we start to wind down and talk about another really cool thing that you brought to the table, and that is around celebrating our wins.
Yeah.
And the fact that you are, quote, terrible at it.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about what that is for you in your world. Just kind of create some context for people.
Yeah, I mean, for example, when I came in here, I don't know if that ends up on the finished cut or not, but Vern was saying I'm a shadow of my former self, something along those lines.
Yeah, maybe I
lost a little bit of weight.
Maybe I didn't use the right terminology. but isn't, I think what you're about to point to is like what the brain does with what was said or whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, what do you mean by that?
But, so like, for example, with that, where it's like, yeah, I've lost a bit of weight. That's great. It should be something that you're happy with. And, but like, I'm almost uncomfortable hearing that because I'm like, well, I've lost like 20 pounds, which is not nothing, but I'm like, yeah, I kind of need to lose another 20. And that's the only thing I can think about. So when I hear that, all I hear in the back of my head is, well, you're not fucking there yet. Like, why?
Yeah, totally.
Settle down. Yeah. I'm uncomfortable being like the center of attention on something that I feel like I'm miles away from where I need to be. But and so similarly with things like in my business, we've been growing like crazy, all that kind of stuff. But as soon as we get close to, wow, we really killed it this year, I'll be like, yeah, good job. Really, though, we should be at, set the bar higher.
But don't forget, we were supposed to do this.
Yeah, exactly.
Or even if you exceed expectations, it's like, yeah, but we're not here, though.
Yeah, totally. But those guys are doing that.
Yeah.
And, like, this has been me, like, the whole time. Like, I remember graduating high school and going to the high school graduation, and I was like, well, what was I going to do? Not graduate high school? And then, like...
Yeah, that's a possibility.
We're celebrating graduating high school?
Yeah.
Really?
And now I'm, like, going to my kid's kindergarten graduation.
Yeah, totally.
And I'm like, this is great!
Yeah, so proud of you.
Yeah, which is funny. And, same thing, honestly, graduating undergrad, graduating law school, all that kind of stuff. I'm like, yeah, well, I mean, you
have to graduate law school to become a lawyer.
Exactly. Like, there we are.
That's table stakes in the game, man.
Meanwhile, I look at that and go like, oh my word. Like, I just can't even imagine. That's
How many years were you in school?
Oh my God, I was in school so much. I spent forever exploring a bunch of different options.
A long time.
Yeah.
Forever.
Well, I think I did about 7 years in my undergrad because I tried a bunch of different things and didn't know what I wanted to do. And then after that, took some time, decided that I wanted to become a lawyer, but I had never actually focused on my grades. So I had to go back for 2 more years before I could even go to law school.
Nice.
To get
Were
my
you
grades
partying
up.
or what?
Honestly, just didn't once something I realized it didn't interest me, I was like, whatever.
Right.
I'll just try and skate by and just barely pass because I don't really have any other plans.
Yeah,
you know? So anyways, went back and it was remarkable how well I could do if I really put the effort in. And then I did.
I think everyone could take a note of that. Just saying.
Yeah. Oh my God. I was like, this is actually so easy. Like wow. Comparatively, like if you do all the reading ahead of time, it was like there's like 5% of the class is actually doing all the reading ahead of time.
Yeah.
And you don't realize it when you're in your own head about how you don't know anything about what's going on.
Right.
But it's really apparent when you actually do the work ahead of time that no one else does.
Wow.
There's a quote that when you come down the stairs, which sometimes is just noise.
Yeah.
Like I'll just run through it. But I happened to pay attention to it today. For some reason, I decided to pay attention to it today. And it says, what does it say? Preparation mixed with opportunity is what equals success. So we are all given these opportunities. And if we spend even a fraction of the time obsessing over what we haven't done yet or where we haven't been yet, in focusing on what needs to be done in the moment, it is impossible to not succeed.
Yeah.
You are never going to stay where you were because those actions invariably move you forward.
It's math, man. When you change the formula, you're going to get a different outcome. It's
totally
that simple, right?
And it's a testament to it, right? When you got clear and you decided to take the action, to do the thing, go figure, you got the degree.
And it speaks volumes, though, to your point. You could tell, let's just say 5% of the people did the reading, did the work. Isn't that a metaphor for life? We're so worried about what our successes and how well we're going to do. And it's like, wow, straight up, most people don't really put in that much effort at life.
No, we do not.
And it's not like it's a comparison game, but the point to that is if you put in the effort toward the thing that it is you want to accomplish, the likelihood is you're going to land on it or somewhere damn close, right? So speaking of which, is there a way? Do you know how many people would have entered that class that you were in, and do most people actually get through it when they decide to do it?
Law school, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's unless you drop out because you hate it or something like that,
right?
It's one of those things where, and that sort of speaks to that whole thing of it's not that great of a thing to have done because getting into law school is really hard, in Canada at least.
Well, yeah.
Graduating once you're in is actually, it's 95% or something like that, aside from people who just drop out because they decide it's not for them. But,
probably because we all need more lawyers in this world.
Well, but it speaks volumes, though, to be able to get in, because it's not like everyone's applying.
And that is so the people that come in, because they're, I'm assuming, because it's a bit harder to get in. Well, we've just culled the herd.
Significantly,
I know, right? What a metaphor. You're out, denied.
Yeah.
But that is now you're more guaranteed to have the 95% output at the end because everybody's ready and everybody you hope is clear what the expectations are and we'll do what needs to be done, right?
Yeah.
Well,
law school is interesting though because you get a lot of people who do it, and I was actually kind of in that realm just because they're like, well, I have a degree. I probably am pretty smart and I'm good at school, but I have an English degree or a philosophy degree or something like that. They're like, I can either work at Starbucks or I can go and be a lawyer. You know what I mean?
The options are
endless. Or you can maybe be a prof at a university. And that's probably about it in terms, there are other options, obviously. You can work in copyright and things like that. But in things that your degree actually lends itself to, there's not a lot of options. So you get a lot of people who are just sort of do it as okay, well, if I want to be successful at something, I'm out of other ideas. This is a default. It's an easy thing to do. Right?
Yeah.
It's not easy, but
Speaking of your practice and whatnot, one of the things that immediately attracted me to you was that you were so youthful, like myself. No, but really though, it's funny because in my industry, we always joke and say when you go to a conference, it's gray hair, white hair, and no hair, a sea of just elderly people.
Yeah.
And I just look like a sore thumb in the middle of the room, even though I'm starting to catch up with the gray. But,
you're going in on the side.
But so you and I have talked about this in private, but talk a little bit about why did at the time probably a 30-year-old guy, why did you decide to commit to wills and estates?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess we haven't talked about this on the podcast yet, but
Yeah.
I do wills and estates exclusively. So lots of people think that it's a. I get frequently asked like, are all your meetings all filled with like tears and all that kind of thing? And
It's so morbid, eh?
yeah, I mean, it can be. It's not really like. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, no,
happy
go
speaking to it. Okay.
by all means. Anyway.
Yeah. So Vern and his wife came in, and they're clients of mine, and I don't know your experience dealing with it. It wasn't morbid at all. We were laughing the whole time. It's not that we didn't take it seriously, but
no, like this is the kind of conversation I have with my clients. It's like everyone thinks that dealing with like say wills and estates or life insurance or these kinds of things are like this big ugly monster, and it isn't really actually that. It's actually you going through the process, and when it's complete, you feel relieved. It's like, oh wow, like I dealt with that, and you get to. It wasn't really emotional, but there are some parts to the process when you really want to think, particularly.
You get connected to your humanity.
Yeah, what's going to happen
sure.
to my kids? That's like the main thing that you get. You're like, oh, like, and then you start thinking about like what would their life actually be like. Oh, and then there's certain questions you answer and conversations you now get to have with family members about like what the plan actually is.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely,
it's
an uncomfortable
process.
and it's liberating. So I did that work as well. I did that with Vern, and my lawyer. And man, does it ever get you connected to the fact that you are not immortal?
Yeah,
that there is an inevitable end date. And while I never thought I would hit 40, I didn't think that number existed. Here I am at year 40 in my life, and getting present to, holy shit, it's a real thing. Time goes consistently, guaranteed, without fail.
Yeah.
And you just get closer to that future. That is just a matter of fact.
So what was the thing? Was
that
there like
drew me to it?
Yeah, like
yeah. Circling back to my dad, and we knew it was all going to come full circle.
Yeah,
Anyways,
isn't interesting? Yeah.
So he and my mom were separated. And he was in Vancouver. He passed away. This was while I was just kind of finishing. No, I just finished law school. I was doing articling, and he passed away without a will, without anything. He was a pack rat. He basically just left the biggest mess you can imagine, and it was so much work. Dealing with everything was a total disaster. We didn't even know what he had in his accounts.
Are you an only child?
No, two other siblings as well. But I was the
You were designated.
I was the lawyer, so it was like, this guy can deal with it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
My brother's dealing with this. Yeah.
But it was the biggest thing. It wasn't the amount of work that we had to do. It was the lasting emotion that I had about the whole thing was like, what a fucking mess I had to clean up. That was the last thing you left for me. It was almost like a final fuck you a little bit. Not really, but it was like my feeling about it was like, are you kidding me right now?
Totally.
But think about that though, right? This is perfect. Like, isn't that really kind of, if you're being really raw about it, isn't that kind of what it's like if you don't take that responsibility? It's kind of like
it can be,
someone's got to deal with all that shit.
Yeah, it's
right.
Yeah, and honestly, that was a big thing for me, was being like, okay, for me personally, that's the last thing I want to have my kids thinking about if they ever have to deal with that for me.
For sure.
Let's and I see it on the other side, on the estate side, where if there's a plan in place and things are clear and it's just like you're following instructions, it's almost like there's a relief that people have where they feel like, okay, you know what, even though terrible things happened, this person's passed away, they sort of planned for this. It gives them a sense of comfort that there's a roadmap that someone else has laid out, that their parent or whoever it is has laid out and said, things will be okay. These are the steps you follow, and it kind of really can change the trajectory about how people feel about the whole thing.
Yeah, 100% for sure, man. That's freaking awesome. And the thing that's interesting about this is, there's a ton of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, the truths.
The absolute
relative truth. Yeah, there's a lot of relative truths out there for people when it comes to things like estate planning, for example. They think, oh, well, I'm young, I don't need to worry about that. Yeah. Or they think, well, no, my parents, they don't have any money, so they don't need to worry about that.
Yeah, that's not a thing to deal with.
That's the thing that people don't understand, that regardless, though, you're literally taking a human off the earth. So we need to, talk about bank accounts and cell phone accounts, and we need to worry about, maybe some money and property and da-da-da. There's a lot of things to consider you have a lot of elements to your
Yeah.
life, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about money. It's actually very little about money, right?
For sure, yeah, and a lot of it's about having the right people being able to run things. Because I mean, you'd always hope. Like, how many kids do you have? Two, yeah. So we all have more than one child, and so the worst case scenario is where you can leave a bunch of money to your kids, but it's done poorly, or you don't have a plan in place, and that actually ends up actively hurting their relationship, which 100%. Is the last thing you'd ever want it to do,
totally,
right?
Yeah.
And I see it all the time because I deal with the estate side, where families are just like at each other's throats and all that kind of thing.
Get their piece.
Yeah, and it's I'd rather leave nothing to my kids than have it like make them get along with each other. And donate it all to charity instead or something. I don't know.
Part of it is all that emotion and shit, right? And people are dealing with stuff, so it's like the human nature is like, I don't know. For example, you want a piece of the pie, or you want to win something, or you want to be right, or you need to be validated in some way, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But to your point, like a lot of times, I think you even told me this once. Like a lot of parents or people might think, like, oh, the kids, they love each other. They'll work it out.
Yeah.
In the arena.
No, exactly. Yeah, in the octagon.
The gladiator arena.
Well, the worst thing I've had is someone who was just like, well, I want these 3 kids to, I think she had like 5 kids. These 3 kids to be the executors all together. And the executor is the one who's dealing with the estate, making sure that everything's bills are paid, making all the final decisions. And I was like, so normally you just want one person just to avoid fights. And I was like, do they get along? And she's like, no, but they have to get along sometime. And I was like, that is not the time.
Sounds like the perfect time to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally.
So everybody gets a pistol.
Yeah.
And go.
There's only 3 bullets. You don't know which gun they're in.
Totally. So if people would dare to begin to navigate this type of work and to have that sort of clarity and planning in place, where can they find you?
I can do. Well, we can do a plug. I have a website which is just thelastword.ca. That's the name of my business.
Love that. By the way,
you can tell
it's awesome.
I'm fairly comfortable with having a chat about the fact that we're all going to die and things like that. Why shy away from it? It's a natural fact. It's what's going to happen, right?
I love that you have a story, man. Like you actually went through that pain and saw, like, obviously losing a parent.
Yeah.
Particularly, you're a relatively young guy, so I'm assuming your dad was somewhat youngish. But we don't need to get too down the rabbit hole. But the point is just that you actually went through that, and you're like, holy shit, this sucks. I'm going to do something about this.
It's something that people don't place a lot of value in, or like they know they need to do it, but they're like, man, let's. It's uncomfortable and it's not urgent. Let's not do it now. It's super easy.
Totally.
To do, for sure. Yeah.
So the last word
.ca.
And then any social.
I mean, look up the last word.
Go
on
to the
Facebook
website
or something like that.
Go to the website. In other words,
we have social. I just don't know.
Clearly, he's got a plan in place.
Yeah, obviously,
it's pretty obvious. You might want to talk to this guy.
Yeah, exactly. The guy with all the cameras. He's your man.
Awesome. Well, so we'll. This will be the episode. Thank you so much for coming and playing with us and talking about what most of us men would never ever have a conversation around, and it was good to have that type of conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for having me on. It's been fun.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah.
Awesome. So that was episode 73. Again, thanks, Craig, for coming on board and playing the game and being willing to be poked and prodded. I love to poke and prod people, but sometimes people don't like to be poked and prodded. So thank you for humoring us in our basement, with sticks. So we are all on a journey, all of us. And you got to get that it is inside of appreciating the journey that we're on. And as you go through life, the things that you've learned might not actually be applied in the way that you thought it should be applied. And we just get to be okay with how that goes. Appreciating that we have all and will all continue to bring more to the table, more rich context, more opportunities to now apply it in unique and special ways. So be okay with where you're at. Understand that the inevitability to get to where you're going is only a matter of time. And what you're learning will be There will be a time for it to be applied, and it will work and it will make sense if you allow it to. Enjoy your Saturday.